So, why did autism diagnoses increase so drastically? And if it wasn't linked to vaccines, what other factors could be involved? Like, how does the alignment of great powers relate to the issue at hand? Why does Robert F. Kennedy Jr. face such an intense media scrutiny and dislike? Is there a significant difference in how the media treated Kennedy compared to Donald Trump during their respective presidential campaigns? Now, I don't subscribe to Democrats. I don't subscribe to Republicans. Me personally, I'm a realist. I'm not Democratic nor Republican. I guess I'm probably more independent than anything else. But these are valid questions. How does media bias influence public perception? I think we're seeing this more and more. What impact does the media's portrayal of Kennedy as a threat to science and democracy have on ordinary citizens? How do different news outlets shape the narratives around Kennedy's candidacy? Hmm? I mean, is there a fair and balanced assessment of Kennedy's positions, or are they presented in a way to deliberately negative? Are they presented in a way where they're perceived and seen in a negative light? How do these media reactions reflect broader societal activities and attitudes toward vaccine skepticism and conspiracy theories? I think that we need to really dissect these questions and really look at this below the surface. Now, the statements made by Democratic Representative Robert F. Kennedy Jr. During his campaign announcement, they raised some pretty intriguing questions. Now, while it is true that his family's efforts have contributed significantly to reshaping the perception of disabilities in America, one may question the extent to which he can claim association with their legacy while at the same time promoting this controversial idea that vaccines cause autism. Like, does this association undermine his credibility on the topic? That's a question for you guys. It's a question for everyone, honestly. You got to look at the source. Always got to look at the source. And beyond that, by emphasizing the perceived negatives of autism in comparison to preventable diseases, does it imply a hierarchy of value between these two? Now, additionally, the fact that his conspiracy theories have caused some family members to basically disavow him begs the question of how to devise, it begs the question of how divisive his views might be within his own family. And how does this affect his campaign and public perception? Now, even going beyond that, like drawing a parallel between RFK Jr.'s, drawing a parallel between RFK Jr.'s anti-autism rhetoric and the actions of his grandfather, Joseph Kennedy Sr., who endorsed a lobotomy on his own daughter. It invites reflection on the historical attitudes toward, disability and the impact of such views. So, how do these past perspectives influence the current decisions and the current discussions around vaccines and autism? Right? Now, the assertion that RFK Jr.'s stance fosters shame and self-blame among parents of autistic children, it raises some pretty significant and very important ethical considerations. Should the schools tell you what to do with your kids? Should the government tell you what to do with your kids? Should individuals be made to feel responsible for their child's condition based on vaccine choices? You know, we're just having an open discussion, open dialogue here. So, whether you agree with Kennedy's position on vaccines, that's entirely up to you. I'm not here to persuade you one way or another. But I do want you to think about things. You know, was Tucker Carlson's decision to leave Fox a good thing? Should Tucker Carlson be allowed to speak his mind and not be forced to hold back? Freedom of speech is worth fighting for, folks. You know, both political parties and their donors have reached a consensus on what benefits them. And they actively collude to shut down any conversation about it. Did you know that the United States has now become pretty much a one-party government? Is anybody aware of that? Like the superpower of the world, once known for, having the most powerful economy, has experienced a sudden shift, to say the least. A series of extraordinary events have essentially been swept under the nation, swept across the nation, and it's stunning to all of us. And it's happening right before our eyes. I mean, for those who have their eyes open anyway, a lot of people are just too busy scrolling on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok to realize what's really happening. But for those who are aware, it's pretty obvious what's happening at this point. From global natural disasters that are, technically created, manufactured, to political turbulence, you name it. The U.S. is facing it all. And in the recent turn of events, the U.S. has been subjected to credit ratings that have haunted its chances to increase the debt cap. Now, thankfully, we've managed to get past it, but, this was just weeks ago. Tucker Carlson, he also highlighted the corruption and the wealth gap in our economy. The U.S. economy is truly in jeopardy, folks, and this means the international market is definitely going to have to be bearing a lot of the consequences. Simple fact of the matter is that we're a global economy at this point. These credit ratings, their opinions of, these credit ratings, much like our own credit ratings, their ratings and opinions on the relative ability of an entity to meet a financial commitment. Much like, if your credit rating's like 500, then that means that, lenders don't think that you have a very strong ability to pay the money back. And that's why you'll end up paying higher interest. The flip side to that is that, if you've got an 800 credit score, then that means that lending institutions believe that you will pay the money back, and they reward you with lower interest rates. So, keeping that in mind, the U.S. credit rating pretty much works the same way. Now, the ratings are used for strategic planning, peer benchmarking, and other, purposes related to the financial stability of issuers. Now, before diving into the U.S. affairs, let's talk about Fitch ratings, right? So Fitch, it's a well-known credit rating agency that monitors financial stability. And recently, the agency placed the United States government's AAA rating under negative, which ultimately is shocking the U.S. economy and economic landscape. And this review, it escalated the gamesmanship between Congress and the White House, but it didn't stop the government from limiting its financings. No, government's pretty much got a blank check that it's willing to cut checks to anyone who they see fit. Now, over the years, the U.S. government has consistently increased its debt ceiling, surrounding it without reducing it to balance out the ratio. If you go back to 1962, all the way up to maybe about 15, 20 years ago, the government increased the ceiling about 74 times, including raising it 18 times under President Ronald Reagan, 8 times under President Bill Clinton, and about 7 times under President George Bush. President Barack Obama followed suit. He raised it 5 times. So it's not just Biden. It's not just Trump. All of the historic presidents have essentially been doing the same thing. Tucker Carlson pointed out that an economic collapse led to communist revolutions across Germany and ultimately to the rise of the Nazi regime. He argued that the U.S. is facing not only economic problems, but they're also facing issues related to CERN, also known as CERN. So, CERN is the largest physics laboratory in the world, known for its groundbreaking research, of course. However, according to Tucker Carlson, CERN's European laboratory is building a huge accelerator that would have far more benefits than conventional ones, including a plasma wake field accelerator using protons. Has anybody heard about this? Because pretty sure that they're not talking about this on mainstream media. Now, Carlson also highlights the wealth gap and corruption in the American economy, and he blames Klaus Schwab of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, for supporting the abuse of power by American elites, which further contributes to this problem that we're dealing with. If you combine this with the negative credit rating, there is a very high chance that the U.S. government could very well face default on outstanding loans and face a downgrade of its credit rating. Now, obviously, a lot of this is behind us, but this is only going to be, this is yet another can that has been designed to be kicked down the road. And we will be revisiting this topic going into 2025. So yeah, debt ceiling has been lifted, but it's only temporary. The consequences of negative credit ratings extend well beyond the U.S. economy to the international market. So, it's not just the U.S. that's going to be dealing with the fallout from this problem. Now, currently negotiations have allowed the U.S. to ultimately raise the statutory borrowing authority up to 34, I think it's like 31 or 32 trillion dollars. But the real question at this point is about the U.S.'s credit worthiness and, the fiscal challenges that still remain. Right? Meanwhile, the wealth gap in the United States has led to significant corruption and a complete lack of accountability. I mean, look at the investigations of Trump. Look at the investigations of the Biden family. Need I say more? Financial tension in the United States is increasing, impacting short-term yields, destabilizing the financial markets. The collapse of the bond markets, one of the many issues that could ultimately devastate the financial landscape. Investors, they need to rethink their portfolios. Whether you're investing in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, index funds, ETFs, real estate, investors need to really rethink their portfolios and ultimately adjust their investments to make to account for the fact that the market's very volatile and to account for further credit condition tightening. I mean, with the Federal Reserve's decision to raise interest rates, this has literally made obtaining credit much more difficult. And if you can get credit, it's much more expensive. So, this combined with concerns about inflation and energy imports, this could definitely lead to an economic collapse somewhat similar to what we saw back in 2008. But I do think that this time around, it will be much different. But, as I've said many times before, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it frequently rhymes. The U.S. negotiations are crucial as the consequences of economic growth stopping would ultimately include job losses. That's going to affect everyone. Of course, if you're not a part of the working class, maybe you're less affected. But even if you're not a part of the working class, you likely have businesses that you own, are operating, and you have employees that work for you. So everyone will be affected. A business that depends on its employees to create products and services, they would ultimately be affected. So even if they themselves are not laid off, the workforce would be. And so would the company's bottom line. We'd see declining consumer spending. Consumer confidence would be down. People would be trying to save money and prepare and not be out shopping, contributing to different companies' profit margins, revenues, and other things that are required to have a successfully running business. This could also lead to poverty. The 2011 incident serves as a huge reminder of the impact of failing to reach an agreement, with credit ratings, downgrades, and heated arguments. And we saw this already. So we know what it looks like the if there's a default of any kind, and we just got a taste of that back in 2011. So it's almost like our government doesn't pay attention to history and they haven't learned their lessons. The U.S. plays a fundamental role in the global economic stability, and being that we're a global economy at this point, the ripple effect of its actions could be very significant. Now, at this point, we can't predict the future condition of the U.S. economy in a few months. I don't even think Fed Chair Jerome Powell or any economist on the planet can do that. But it is crucial for the government to understand that if the U.S. economy crashes, then the whole world's economy is going to crash as well. Behind closed doors, policymakers, they're working very actively under great pressure to reach a resolution.